Hello, friends of Studio Brule. This is Steve Brule, and it is coffee time, where I go over some of the stuff that's come across my desk in a while. And as you may have noticed, I have not done a coffee session in several weeks. So there is a lot of stuff to talk about. But before I mention that, here you see my patriarchy card on display here, VIP club member, which authorizes me to comment on all the comings and goings of the evil global feminist empire, which has its thousands of tentacles spread all the way around the world. One of the reasons that I haven't had a coffee session in quite a while is that, one, I get a little bit burned out seeing all this this collapse, this evil growing before our very eyes, and it seems like nothing we can do about it but talk about it. And since the last coffee session, there's just been a billion things. There's several things a day that could fill up 3 days of analysis. The things are moving so fast. So today I thought I would go over a number of them, and one of the themes, as I reviewed some of the links that I've been collecting, one of the themes is the extortion that they're entering into now, using the riots and protests of the terrorist Antifa and BLM groups, using the coronavirus, suggesting that nothing can ever get back to normal until we do things like take all a vaccine, or that we implement a leftist environmental policies that have not been proven, and that all analysis shows that could push the world into poverty and destroy the quality of life for millions, if not billions, of people around the world. So they're using this excuse, and this is very revealing. So let's have a look, get straight into some of the meatier issues here. What was this one up here? Okay, that's my patriarchy card. And welcome to Bill Barry and Horror Cocktail and Josue Viguili and other folks in there. I'm going to just plunge on straight forward here. This little factoid that came across my desk: 61% of women say feminist describes them well. Well, that doesn't mean just I'm sort of a feminist, but it means that they're primarily, or they consider themselves, one of their core identities is to be feminists. Many see feminism as empowering and polarizing. Well, everybody here does know what I think of feminism. Feminism is a hate movement. It's a hate movement for power. And it's actually been being used by the very powerful men in the world who know that if they control the women, they control the men. And only the men really threaten them in terms of competitors, both mating competitors and business competitors, and competitors for power and control of the world. So let's move on a little bit here. These first is just a few small items that I come up and that I came across. I read this little tidbit that was posted on Facebook, and I apologize if you guys have already seen some of these things. And this is a little tidbit through the quarantine, and it says over 100 found partying at 3 a.m. Now, 65 males and 4 staffers were arrested. Nearly 30 women were let go after being issued notices. Isn't that revealing? Our gynocentric culture at work here, the so-called oppression of women, where they're not held accountable for their behavior, but the men are. Even in this day and age, when women have unprecedented privileges, unprecedented power, unprecedented wealth, unprecedented freedoms, and they're virtually immune to the laws that men are held accountable for. That's just a little tidbit. So let's get going on, because I do want to get to the meat of the episode here today. This little factoid in the Atlantic, this is typical of the feminists writing their crap out there. Beware of facts, man. All these links are in the description if you want to dig into them a little bit deeper. This woman complains that men are daring to raise facts, to use facts. And if you're interested in your intelligence being insulted, and and being faced with the Atlantic mainstream magazine publishing pure hatred, vile, hatred of men written by a feminist just for her amusement, trying to suggest that men who use facts are somehow oppressing women. Who knows? Another one here. This white woman calls the cops on a black man over a parking space. Uses the N-word, says Newsweek. And this is in Apple News. And this got a lot of attention, surprising amount of attention. For a woman who used the N-word, this was worthy news on major news networks. A white woman calls the cops on a black man over parking space and uses the N-word. This is considered newsworthy. Of course, because it props up their narrative that we're living in a racist country and that all these white people are terrible racists. And this one, MSNBC host prays for every American to suffer just so Trump won't get reelected. This is the depth of their hatred of Trump. And here, this stuff is not newsworthy, right? Mainstream media refuses to cover this. This fellow feels compelled to remind you that Hillary Clinton's court date on the emails for her private server, I think it is, are coming up on September 9th at 9 a.m. This is nowhere to be found in the mainstream leftist media, but this is verified fact. I looked into it myself. And here, George Soros pumps another $250 million into Black Lives Matter. $250 million. And it says here, money is going into efforts to control 2020 voting systems and radical left goals. Nobody should be surprised at that. The amount of money that's being poured in right now, there's a reason, of course, behind that, and we're going to get to that in this session. Much of Soros's money is going into efforts to defund the police and control 2020 voting systems, his foundation revealed. We're going to look a little bit at that in a few minutes. This likely refers to the vote by mail programs and overturning ballot security laws. Remember this for later when I've got the little thing to read on you to say just what their strategy might be around this. And of course, some of you may have already come across this, but I hope to analyze it and provide a little bit extra insight for you. So on to another topic, and we're just touching on small topics here for the time being, and then we'll get into the meat. Walsh says teachers openly fret that parents might hear them brainwashing children and call parents dangerous. This is a fellow who promotes homeschooling. Now, I think before I go forward on this, this one is worth reading. Again, the link's in the description, because the teachers actually feel that they should have sole control over the minds of your kids, and without even telling the parents, they don't feel that the parents should know what they're up to in there. This is an education system that is dominated by feminists from kindergarten and preschool all the way up to graduate school, right through the entire university system. They don't want you to see what your children are being taught. This would be unheard of 20, 30 years ago. All these teachers would be fired for saying these things 20, 30 years ago. But there's a slippery slope that's been going since the 1960s. We've slowly been giving up freedoms, giving up rights, having been allowed the feminists to take control and power over virtually every part of our culture. And now they feel you shouldn't even know what they're teaching your children. Let's move on. And in the Not the Bee, this is an interesting website, playing off the popularity of the Babylon Bee, which is satire. This is actually not satire, but it would be if it would have been a few years ago if it was just printed as what's going on in the news. College math professor says the idea that math is in any way objective is a myth that reeks of white supremacist patriarchy. Almost everything they want to complain about is white supremacist patriarchy. And they'll find some twisted little rationale to tie it back. This is the math professor. I mean, how is this person allowed to teach math when they're spouting feminist propaganda in class. And here's what she says. Don't miss this part now. A math professor who teaches Brooklyn, this is part of the article, Brooklyn College tweeted last week her mind-numbingly postmodern woke Marxist sentiment that math is not in any way objective, and in any such idea reeks of white supremacist patriarchy. Incredible, isn't it? Incredible. And here's the same woman on Twitter. Y'all must know that the idea that math is objective or neutral is a myth. Y'all must know that. Y'all, I'll tell you what I all do know. You're an idiot. You shouldn't be teaching math. In fact, you shouldn't be teaching anything. You should get back to knitting or something. You can't figure out that there's, and I know where this is coming from, okay? Because this is no surprise. I think what they're originally referring to is that in statistics, there's an old saying, there's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's statistics. And that's not because statistics isn't objective. It's because the interpreting the statistics is open to argumentation. Interpreting the statistics. That means putting meaning to the statistics as it relates to human activities in the world. So the statistics themselves may be, if they're well done, perfectly objective, but it's how you interpret or extract meaning from the numbers that is open to interpretation, to argumentation. But that's not what they've taken this a lot further, and they even coining terms like 2 + 2 = 5. And of course, the hordes of weak-minded sheeple are taking this to mean that math is not any different than sociology or dreaming. We wouldn't have cell phones. I don't have to go into that. You guys know all that. And here's the college fix, talking about a professor who might be fired for refusing to undergo diversity training is not backing down. We need a lot more of this. We need professors with backbone standing up and saying, you know something, I'm just not taking your diversity brainwashing. And here's the fellow right here, Jeffrey Polvorde. Okay, let's move on to the next topic. And the next topic is, let me just confirm here. My next topic is Antifa and the UN. And of course, Antifa and Black Lives Matter and the UN and George Soros and all these people, they're all one big group with one big goal. They want to bring in socialism. They want to bring in a one world government, which ultimately leads to communism. I think it was Lenin himself who said that socialism leads to communism. So, wait a second here. Did I get the picture up right? Okay, so we're going to start this off with disturbing, and this is disturbing, developments in how the police forces and the government and the authorities are responding to the powers they have relating to lockdowns around the coronavirus. Of course, the lockdowns are absolute nonsense. This is part of the extortion process. They are making people, remember that it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve. That's how we were all sold this stuff. And at the time I thought, what's 2 or 3 weeks? Okay, big deal. We'll take a 2 or 3 week vacation, do whatever you want at home. You know, how bad can that be? Of course, that was never their plan in the first place. We're going on 6 months. Now we're seeing real pain. We're seeing businesses fail. We're seeing taxes are going to go through the roof, that future generations are going to be paying through the roof for all these government failures. We have loss of jobs. We have increased suicides. We have people not getting medical treatment for treatable diseases and dying. I know some specific cases of that myself. We have increased suicides. We have destroyed marriages. And they're training the younger generation to get used to being stuck in cages. I saw an image of what they're planning for back to school, putting a glass wall around each kid's desk. This is training so you to accept your role as a sheep not allowed to leave your sheep pen. But anyways, this officer in Victoria grabs a woman by the throat for not wearing a face mask. This is violence for not wearing a face mask. A face mask, which very many medical authorities say is actually more harmful than useful. But even if it was useful, why is it obligatory? It's supposed to be voluntary following the rules, but that's not voluntary when a police officer grabs you by the throat for not wearing a face mask. And here, Bill Barry says, your brother almost died because he wasn't able to get heart surgery because of the lockdown. They've canceled so many very routine, many of the heart surgeries today many of them are considered routine, surgeries that save lives in order to keep hospital beds empty. What they're doing here is they're making people's lives as uncomfortable and miserable as possible, and then they're going to tell us we can't open up again until we accept universal vaccination, until we accept the Green Deal programs that are spreading around the world, and I've got some to talk about that, till we accept radical changes to the economy. All of these things are that these leftist tyrants have been trying to do unsuccessfully for the past 20, 30 years. They're going to ramrod it through, holding us under extortion, holding us at hostage, all of our lives at hostage, to extort the changes they want out of us. This has all been part of their plan. So much has happened in the last 6 months that if anybody thinks this was all just we gotta help save the world, we gotta protect people's life stuff, it's absolute nonsense. There's no excuse for clinging to that belief. I never believed it from the beginning. But with what's going on today, there's absolutely no excuse for clinging to that belief at all anymore. For the one thing, this quarantine and the response to the coronavirus is going to cause more human suffering and death than the coronavirus itself by a long shot. It was dead easy to understand right from the beginning that we should be quarantining the elderly and the sick with those who had other pre-existing illnesses. That was easy to do. That didn't require shutting down the economy. Didn't require shutting down even the borders. You quarantine the sick, those who have the virus, those who are at risk, whose lives are at risk. And those people were already mostly in self-quarantined in old age homes. So this is absolutely in no way possible just a concern for human life. This is concern for ushering in the one world government, the new Green Deals, the entire new restructuring of the economies that they're telling us they're not going to allow us out of our cages again until we all toe the line to restructure the economies and the world and our cultures to their liking. This is absolute tyranny is what it is. Absolute, unconditional, no hold back tyranny. And anyone who goes out and votes Democrat in this next election, really, you deserve what you're going to get. The rest of us, we've got to find a way to survive through it and fight it. Here in Edmonton, they had to conduct 22,000 tests to find the latest 115 cases, not deaths. They had to do 22,000 tests just to find these cases. And then they report the total number of cases found. Well, of course, you're going to find more cases when you do thousands upon thousands of more tests. It doesn't mean the virus is any more dangerous or any more widespread. You're just looking harder for it. And here the folks says that exact point. The more you test, obviously, the more you'll find, and even then, it's pretty pathetic. Now that the average COVID deceased age in Alberta is 84 years old. The average age for all deceased in Alberta is 82. 82. So again, this points to the lie of the need to quarantine the entire population. If we need to quarantine and protect anybody, it's the elderly. and those with pre-existing conditions. And if we had done only that and allowed the economy to go on, we would have had millions upon billions of extra dollars to do exactly that, protect the vulnerable. But we don't have it now. What we have done is we have saddled the regular people with enormous tax debts, with reduced job opportunities, and this is part of the plan. Look, throughout history, the wealthy and the powerful have always wanted to secure a slave wage, a workforce, whether it's by slavery or cheap wages or whatever it is. That's always been their goal. That's always going to be their goal. They can't rule the world without a slave class. Destroying the economies, ruining the jobs, ruining small businesses is exactly what's going to push the bulk of the working force under their control even further. This is nothing but a con job. We've known it since the beginning. I just don't know if there's any way to stop it. There's only a handful of people who are even willing to consider the fact that the powerful in the world are manipulating you. There's only a handful of people who are even willing to consider that fact. They have so much faith in these psychopaths that run the world. Now I'm working up I'm jumping ahead of myself here, but I am working up a essay on why the possibility of pedophilia amongst the super powerful is not as far-fetched as it sounds, and the reasoning may surprise you. So let me read this quote, because I'm not getting to that today. The recovery from the coronavirus crisis represents an opportunity to reset the global economy and prioritize sustainable development without further damaging the planet, Prince Charles said at the opening of the World Economic Forum virtual meeting. Wow, folks. Reset the global economy. He's not even talking about his own country anymore. He's not even hiding the fact that they are talking about global governments. When they talk about reset the global economy, they're talking about global government. Prioritize sustainable development in the global economy. That's global government. That's one world government without further damaging the planet. Nonsense. And this is at the World Economic Virtual Forum meeting. Let's move on. Reading another quote. Did I not get the title out of this thing? There should have been a title with his face on it. But anyways, this is the World Economic Forum outlining a 5-point plan to rebuild economies following a global recession. Notice how they say that, following a global recession. It's not a global recession. It's a deliberate destruction of the global economies in order to do exactly what you're saying needs to be done now. This was all understood from the beginning. The 71-year-old prince said the pandemic was the result of a breakdown in the link between humanity and nature that could be corrected by recognizing interdependence of all living things. Nonsense. We've always recognized the interdependence of all living things. And honest men have always been working on these very same problems. We were working on these problems back in the 1980s at Dow Chemical, and we're still working on them. But this group wants one world government total power. Reading from the top. He said that the pandemic, which has forced governments worldwide to mothball their economies. Now listen to that manipulation of this whole incident. The pandemic forced governments worldwide to mothball their economies? No, it did not. Governments, rather ordered by the super wealthy in the world, were told to mothball their economies, had showed the people dramatic change was possible. Sweden did not mothball their economy. They didn't have these extreme quarantines, and they're doing just fine. Here he says, we have a golden opportunity to seize something good from the crisis. Its unprecedented shockwaves may well make people more receptive to big visions of change. Wow, he is just revealing too much. Unprecedented shockwaves that they themselves created to soften the people up and extort them into accepting the changes that these people have wanted for 60 years, a one world government. If this stuff doesn't make you angry, well, I know it does for everybody here, and I'm speaking rhetorically to those people who would never watch my channel. If this stuff doesn't make you angry, you haven't got a brain in your head. You deserve to be a sheep. You should deserve to be led off to slaughter and turned into a slave. Okay, read this one. And this is coming from a group of medical doctors. Again, defeat COVID-19 by requiring vaccination for all. It's not un-American, it's patriotic. Since when has been taking away your freedoms and rights over your own body considered patriotic? These guys are they're just out of this world crazy. But I'm afraid the experience of my 60 years tells me that the overwhelming majority of people are just going to go along with it. And I'll tell you this, they're going to have to put a gun to my head before I'm taking that vaccine. Here it is here. Make vaccines free, don't allow religious or personal objections, and create disincentives for those who refuse vaccines shown to be safe and effective. Shown to be safe and effective. They're rushing this thing through. They're rushing it like crazy. And they're telling us that hydroxychloroquine doesn't work when we know it does. Hydroxychloroquine with one of the antibiotics and a zinc sulfate, I think it is, or a zinc carbonate vitamin helps the zinc hydrochloroquine work. I'm going to just pause to acknowledge a couple of folks here. Thank you so much, Berkinson's Head. Okay, I can't pronounce it. Keep getting the truth out, Steve. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the support for Studio Brûlé. And there was another one I missed back here some time ago from Harry Holbrook. Thank you so much, Harry, for your support of Studio Brûlé. Glad to see you, Steve. Thought you might have gotten Clintonized. Not yet. I'm too small a player to ever be worrying about those big guys. They won't step one step out of their way to step on an ant like me. That's probably my saving grace. I'm too small for them to worry about. Okay, let's move on to the next thing here. Let's read from that article. To win the war against novel coronavirus that has killed nearly 163,000 in this country, the only answer is compulsory vaccination for all of us. All of us. This is nonsense. It is absolute nonsense. First of all, this coronavirus is nowhere near in the same category as polio or tuberculosis, both of which are far worse. But that's another matter. Let's read from the top. And while the measures that will be necessary to defeat the coronavirus will seem draconian, even anti-American to some, we believe that there is no alternative. Simply put, getting vaccinated is going to be our patriotic duty. Unfortunately, folks, we must have lowered that bar to entry to medical school far too low because this is absolutely moronic. Every last infectious disease is open to control through herd immunity. You do not have to immunize the entire population in order to achieve herd immunity. There's plenty of leeway there to make vaccination optional. And knowing the psychology of the sheep, probably 90% of them will voluntarily take it. And to suggest that we have to make this mandatory is really only all about government power and control. If I want to take the risk of dying from coronavirus, they have no business poking me with some vaccine. Let's read on. The reason. When an effective vaccine is available for COVID-19, it will only defeat the pandemic if it is widely used, creating herd immunity. Herd immunity. Read up on it. You're supposed to be a doctor, for crying out loud. It is important to note that during an epidemic, there is no threshold above which the protection conferred by herd immunity cannot be improved. There is a level at which no further immunity is required to stop the spread of the infectious disease in its tracks. That's what herd immunity means. Stop being manipulative with the words. Of course, 100% immunity is going to be 100% effective. You're not going to get there even with a vaccine, because the reality is even vaccines are not 100% effective, the majority of vaccines. They are effective enough to create herd immunity many times. For instance, tuberculosis is only, the vaccine is only effective about 80% of the time in childhood tuberculosis. In adult tuberculosis, the vaccine is next to non-effective. It's like a 10% effective rate. It cannot stop or cannot create herd immunity to tuberculosis in our population, which is why we have millions of people dying from tuberculosis every year as we speak, even with the tuberculosis vaccine. So stop selling us a fantasy about vaccinations are going to give us 100% immunity or cure this thing. Here he says, thus, the more people are immunized, the lower the risk for all of us, including those who are not vaccinated. Okay, but hey, if I want to take the risk, it's none of your business. Reading from the top. Nor is there an alternative to vaccine-induced herd immunity in a pandemic. Relying on enough people becoming infected and then immune is dangerous, as exemplified by the Swedish experience, where the COVID-19 mortality rate exceeds that of its more cautious neighbors. Broad induction of immunity in the population by immunization will be necessary to end this pandemic. In simple terms, a refusal to be vaccinated threatens the lives of others. No, it doesn't. It does not threaten the life of anyone who chooses to be vaccinated if the vaccination actually works. That's what vaccination is supposed to do, protect the vaccinated person. As a bonus, vaccination can help us towards herd immunity. But to give up bodily autonomy rights to the government for a vaccine that's being rushed through testing purposes to be vaccinated against a disease which kills almost no one in their healthy primes or children at all is absolute insanity. Absolute insanity. And don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-vax. I'm not even an anti-vax person. But on this issue, I'll stand with the anti-vax people, because you should not be forced to take a vaccine. I've taken many vaccines in my life. Vaccines where I thought at the time it made sense to take them. And if some vaccine comes out that I feel is important to take because the risk is very significant and the vaccine looks like it might offer the kind of protection they suggest, I'll probably take it. But I'm certainly not convinced in this particular infectious disease, in this virus. This virus is just not dangerous enough to warrant the incredible, over-the-top, draconian global response that the elite are pushing on us. Not even close. We are being herded like cattle, off to the slaughter, into the slave pens to work our life away. They're trying to destroy the way of life because we're a lot easier to control when you have no resources. So that's my little rant on that. I think we need to raise the bar for entry into medical school. These people don't understand the basics of herd immunity from the looks of it. Disincentives for compliance. So in other words, they not just want to encourage the vaccination and make it free. Far, far from it. They want much more than that. Here's what America must do when a vaccine is ready, they say. Make the vaccines free and easily accessible. Fine, you want to do it, make them free and accessible. I don't have a problem with that. Exempt only those with medical contraindications to immunization. It is likely that more than one vaccine platform will prove effective, and as a result, medical conditions that prohibit all COVID-19 vaccines will be rare. But here's the important part. Exempt only those. Exempt. Exempt, as if it's compulsory already. I could tell you this. I'm hoping some Americans are gonna stand up to their rights with their using their Second Amendment rights if somebody comes to the door and wants to stick them with a vaccine. It doesn't matter if it's 100% effective. You have a right to come and stick with saline water. Sticking you with a needle is an assault. You should be able to pull your gun out and defend yourself from that assault. Here, do not honor religious objections. You're supposed to have the freedom of religious beliefs in the US. But here they want to override it for a so-called scamdemic, the scamdemic. They want to override your religious beliefs to inject you, assault you with a needle. This is just way over the top too much, folks. Do not allow objection preference which violate the social contract. That is no social contract. A contract is signed on both sides. And nobody who doesn't sign a contract like that, you don't even have to object. You just say, hey, I'm not interested. Get off my property. And this is a good point, Campbell. Campbell Davison says, yes, with a needle and vaccine. The fact is that the needle alone is enough to defend yourself. Somebody comes up in the street, holds you down, sticks your needle in your arm, even with nothing in it. You should be able to defend yourself to the full extent of the law, which in my understanding is that's an assault. If they won't stop, you have the right to use the full force necessary to make them stop. I don't think there's any limits to that. Reading from the top. Vaccine refusers could lose tax credits or be denied non-essential government benefits. Health insurers could levy higher premiums for those who, by refusing immunization, place themselves and others at risk. Here it is, this guilting you and others at risk. Who exactly are you placing at risk if the vaccine works? You're not placing anybody else at risk because it's yourself and other people who also chose not to take the vaccine. Jeez, how are these people so stupid? As is the case for smokers. No, smokers is a little bit different because when smoking in an enclosed space, you are putting non-smokers at risk. It is different. But here we go. Private businesses could refuse to employ or serve unvaccinated individuals. This is like full-on communism stuff here. Full-on communism. Reading from the top. Schools could refuse to allow unimmunized children to attend classes. Public and commercial transit companies, airlines, trains, buses could exclude refusers. Public and private auditoriums could require evidence of immunization for entry. In other words, folks, they want to kill you if you don't take the vaccine, because everything they're saying there is 100% expulsion from society, removing your ability to make a living wage, not ability to get a job, refused entry to public places. They'll probably refuse entry to grocery stores where you can buy food. They want to completely kick you out of society to die if you don't take their vaccine. How do Americans grow up with this mentality? What is happening to America today? You guys have, there's a huge, I shouldn't say you guys, there's a huge proportion of Americans who have totally, completely lost their spirit of freedom, their sense to stand up for themselves, to be individuals, to take any risk whatsoever in life. I've said this many times before. Safety sits on the opposite side of freedom. If you avoid all risky things, if you seek out perfect safety, you're going to end up with zero freedom. You have to accept some risk in order to live a free life. The US is filling up faster than anyone might have expected with pathetic sheep cowards trying to usher in a communism and a slave work class. This is probably the shortest period of history, and maybe it'll end up being the only part of history in which there was a small period in which large numbers of people had personal freedoms. And they want to bring that to an end. Reading from the top. The only legal limitation on government or private action is that it is not be discriminatory. It's not hard to see how discrimination would occur if vaccinations were free and accessible to all. That is the only limitation they want placed on government? When did government become the all-powerful, all-important thing? When did government become the all-powerful and most important thing? Government is supposed to be the most limited aspect of your society. Only as much government as is required. And the government is to serve the people, not to order them around and imprison them. Let's read this from the top. How then should immunizations be documented? A registry of immunization will be needed with names entered after immunization completed. Adequate immunization may require more than a single vaccination, and the durability of protection by different vaccines may vary and may require periodic booster immunizations. Thus, immunized persons will need to receive expiration date stamped certification cards, which should be issued to all who are immunized in the country, whether here legally or not. Wow. And this is coming from within the community of voters. There's an enormous amount of people who want this kind of government control over their own lives. Why is it they can't be satisfied to say, I'm afraid of this coronavirus, so I will get the vaccine? Why is that not enough for these people? Why is that not enough? No, they want you to be forced to think like them, forced to behave like them. They're forcing, like the woman who was the police grabbed her throat for not wearing a mask. This sort of voluntary compliance fell by the wayside as fast as the so-called 2 weeks to flatten the curve did. Now they're forcing people to wear masks, beating them up if they don't. Read on here. These measures might seem draconian and would be costly, but ensuring universal vaccination is a negligible sacrifice compared with the costs, deaths, and social upheaval that a sustained pandemic is having on our country. There you go. There is the last of the sentence, is the extortion part of it. In other words, this is implied that in order to get out of a sustained pandemic, we need, and with the sustained pandemic response is, of course, the quarantine they're talking about, the costs of death, social upheaval from a sustained quarantine is having on the country. In other words, they're going to hold you hostage and extort you until you take these measures. And the vaccination is only one part of it. Only one part. Reading from the top. We acknowledge that the refusal to obey rules one considers unjust is an American tradition, but another cornerstone of American tradition is that we come together when it's necessary. The best example of this was during the 2 world wars. Everyone contributed. No one was allowed to opt out merely because it conflicted with a sense of autonomy, and draft dodgers who refused to serve were subject to penalties. This is not the same. This is an infectious disease around the world. We're not fighting an external enemy, and the infectious disease has already been shown to be minimally dangerous. Very dangerous for very old people, but so is the flu, so is pneumonia, so is falling. Just falling while getting up from your chair is dangerous for old people. There was a fellow here in Costambar just last year, and I heard him calling from the side of the road, and he had fallen trying to get into his car, and he broke his hip. He was dead 2 days later. He was 85 years old or so. A lot of things are dangerous for old people, including this coronavirus. But the death rate for young people is negligible. There's so many more dangerous things out there that we're not shutting down the economy for. But they're using this excuse. They've brainwashed the people to accept all these extraordinary, unthinkable actions to treat a virus which is just not very dangerous. This is a plan. True, conscientious objectors could refuse to use weapons for religious reasons, but they were obligated to help out in other ways, serving in non-combatant roles. There are no such alternatives for vaccinations. Yes, there are. There's an alternative vaccination that's called not vaccination. And I'll take that alternative. Thank you very much, because I don't trust you're rushing this through. I don't trust anything that's going on about this quarantine, this global crackdown, this deliberate destruction of the economies that are causing millions or perhaps will result in billions of lives hurt, damaged irreversibly, or killed. Let's read on. BNM Bloomberg. The restart of our economy needs to be green. Freeland on decarbonization of the Canadian economy. Here's another condition that's arising in Canada, and they hinted at this very, very early on, tipping their hand to this nonsense. The restart of our economy needs to be green. For you who are not non-Canadians, Chrystia Freeland is now Canada's finance minister. Chrystia Freeland was a journalist. She has absolutely zero experience in finance. She was a journalist. Think about that for a minute. Our prime minister was a grade 4 drama teacher, part-time for a couple of years, and that's the most work he did in his life before he became a politician. So we're led by a grade 4 drama teacher and a journalist as our finance minister, and our health minister was a graphic artist. Those are our leaders in Canada. And they're going to tell us, this woman who is a journalist, who's acting as finance minister, is that we can't restart our economy unless it's according to green, like the Green New Deal. Yes, I am not kidding, Renato, and it gets worse than that in Canada. The big requirement or qualification for being a minister in Trudeau's government is that you have to be a feminist. That was their requirement. And he put in 50-50 females in his cabinet, but virtually even Trudeau ran on the election on the basis of him being a feminist. He has absolutely no experience in any kind of business, any kind of finance, any kind of success in any kind of career. He was a part-time grade 4 drama teacher. This is who are leading our countries and telling us that we need to restart our economy as a green economy. They've been trying to destroy the Alberta oil industry for the last 5 years. Let's read on here. And here is Trudeau here with our journalist / finance minister in the background, the top finance person in the country, who has the brilliant idea that we have to restart our economy from scratch on a green basis in a country which has some of the biggest oil resources in the entire world. We've been trying to build an oil pipeline across the country to refine in Quebec, and an oil pipeline down into the US, I forget the name of it now, with one of the few West Coast deep port tanker docks in the North America, sitting out of Vancouver, off the south of Vancouver, to load oil up, and they want to shut down the oil economy. Anyways, there's a whole list of things that they've screwed up just in the last few years. Lily, here, a writer here, says Trudeau signals big changes are on the horizon. Now, if you notice, Chrystia Freeland tweeted this thing out, or just August 18th, 2 days ago. The next day, this article comes out. Trudeau signals big changes on the horizon for Canada, August 19th. I want to remind you that early in the quarantine, Trudeau managed to get passed in Parliament a bill giving him unfettered power to spend Canadian money without running it through Parliament. And what he did with it, one of the first acts, he got in a controversy for giving $1 billion to a charity organization to distribute at their will, who just happened to be paying his mother, his wife spoke to, and he spoke with, and taking fees from. $1 billion of taxpayer money. Now when he was under investigation for 3 ethics violations, what did he do? He prorogued Parliament because he's a dictator in Canada now. Unbelievably, Canada doesn't have a conservative movement. It's so small. It's a minority government, but he's backed up by the Socialist Party, NDP, and the Separatist Party, the Bloc Québécois, to do all of these things. He's an absolute, complete tyrant. Well, let's read on here. This is our moment to change the future for the better, Prime Minister Trudeau said on Tuesday as he announced Parliament would come back in September. We can't afford to miss it because this window of opportunity will not be open for long. They want to reopen without an oil economy. These are the things these people have been trying to push through for years. They're not workable, but they've created this global economic disaster using the pandemic as an excuse, and now they want to implement all of their plans that nobody would vote for while they have totalitarian power, while they have you under lockdown, imprisoned in your homes, crushing your lives, extorting their desires and goals out of us. It's an extortion that they're doing. Reading from the top. Justin Trudeau is weighing sweeping changes to the country's social welfare system and a series of economic measures that will align Canada with ambitious climate goals. The climate goals that nobody wants. The climate goals that won't do anything but funnel money into these so-called new green efforts that are being pushed by the elites. Those comments mirrored what had been leaked to the Toronto Star more than a week earlier. Trudeau wants to remake the Canadian economy using the pandemic as an excuse. Now think about this. He does not have a mandate elected to do this. He was elected on a minority government, and this was not on the table. He gave himself totalitarian dictator powers, and now he's trying to force it down everybody's throat using the excuse of this pandemic. And this kind of thing is being repeated right across the world. And I don't have the faith that the people in Canada have any will to stand up to anything. They will go along with anything right to the end. Based on those leaks, we're reading from the top again, we should brace for much higher government spending, expanded social programs, new taxes, and a real push to shut down Canada's oil and gas sector. In other words, the leftist dream, and it'll be a thoroughly feminist country. When you read expanded social programs and new taxes, you can read feminism into that. 100% feminism. Reading onward, the government has made clear that decarbonizing the economy is one of their goals, which effectively means shutting down the oil industry. They already put in a carbon tax in Canada. I don't know if you folks who are non-Canadians know that. There's already a carbon tax. It was very controversial. Most people did not want it. Yep, this is true. And here's why I think this must have been a plan. This was all predictable within the first week of the quarantines back in March. All of this was predictable. Many of us were talking about this exact same goal. And what do? They squeeze it out little bit by little bit. They've got people so eager to get back to a normal life that they'll sign up for anything. Reading from the top, I think we can also expect the government to lay the groundwork for a universal basic income and pay people not to work rather than get on with the difficult task of creating an economy with jobs for all. Liberal-leaning thinkers have been calling for this to happen since the pandemic broke out. They actually were calling for this before the pandemic. The pandemic was planned, and they're using it now to ramrod their leftist goals right through the country. And it's not just Canada. This is happening in many parts of the world, as we saw with Prince Charles saying that we had to use this as a rebuild the global economy. into a green economy. Canada is repeating the same words. There are people in the US saying the same words too. High-powered politicians. I think there was something else I was going to point out here. Yeah, universal basic income, pay people not to work. This is communism. Step by step. Now read this. This goes back to July 28th. Boosting marginalized groups, key to feminist economic recovery, report says. This is really priceless. This is really priceless. Let's read exactly what this is here. From the small print there. Canadians cannot expect the economy to fully recover from COVID-19 without helping the most affected by the downturn, including women, people of color, and LGBTQ community, a new report says. And you can guess who ran the report. One of these groups who are women, people of color, and LGBTQ. Every time a feminist comes out with a report, you already know the answer before the report, before they even start their so-called research, that more needs to be done for women. And this is exactly the template that's coming out here. Reading onward. Released Tuesday, a feminist economic recovery plan for Canada, making the economy work for everyone, but especially women, people of color, and the LGBTQ plus. Apparently, that's what everyone means. Was co-written by the Institute for Gender and the Economy at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. There you go. Who could have guessed that the Institute for Gender and the Economy would say that women, people of color, and LGBTQ community need to be helped the most? It is so predictable, it's nauseating. It's like we're analyzing the same thing over and over again. Oh, let's look at this. And of course, more needs to be done for women, people of color, and LGBTQ plus community. Nobody else matters. Let's read this. This is talking about the same. Did I already read? Is this the same one? Maybe I did 2 copies of this here. Go back. Boosting marginalized. That's the same one. Okay. Yeah, this is the same. I just read this. Co-written by the Institute for Gender and the Economy at the University of Toronto. Just feminism. Feminism has infected every university, every program, and every study and report comes out with the same result. More needs to be done for women and LGBTQ plus, plus, plus. Of course, by men, white men. The only group who's always left out because they just happen to be the group that feminists and that group absolutely despise and blame for everything that goes on in the world. Incredible. We actually won't get economic recovery if we don't get to things that are holding women back. I mean, did they write this back in 1980? Because this sentence comes into every one of their conclusions. It will never be enough. While more data on race and gender identity is needed due to lack of availability, the report also notes. Well, they came up with their conclusion even though they need more data on race and gender identity because the data is not available. There's no way to save these people. Reading from the top, the report asks governments at all levels, as well as businesses and charities, to consider 8 policy goals that address systemic racism, emphasize good jobs, protect victims of domestic violence, improve funding for small businesses, promote diversity in the decision-making process. And you know exactly what this means. Address systemic racism means only white people are racist. And emphasize good jobs means giving jobs, making jobs, make work programs for women. And protecting victims of domestic violence does not mean protecting men who are abused at all. It means enabling abusive women to further abuse their husbands very often. improve funding for small businesses. You know, there's going to be an ideological requirement attached to any funding and help that goes on. You're going to have to be a feminist and hire only the so-called disadvantaged communities. And here, as if we need any more of this, August 4th, the New York Times encourages women to blame their husbands for COVID-19 struggles. Let's have a quick look at that. The blame is placed on men's shoulders. If fathers were doing their fair share of work, the narrative goes, mothers wouldn't have it so hard. Poor fathers. He's out there dying, and that's just not enough. Now here we get to Kissinger. Henry Kissinger, for those of you who are not that old, was a very famous American diplomat going back a long, long time. And he says, and he's a globalist, of course, Kissinger says, failure to establish post-COVID New World Order could set the world on fire. And that's Kissinger saying that the way to get out of the COVID-19 is to establish the one world government. The famous presidential foreign policy advisor demanded a global collaborative vision and program and adherence to the principles of the liberal world order. That was on April 7th. These people have not backed down or slowed down in any manner in this. And here, this is Prince Charles. I think we touched on him earlier. Prince Charles says the pandemic is a chance to reset global economy. Prince of Wales unveils a 5-point plan for resetting the global economy. In other words, we need the one world government. How many times have we heard that we need a one world government to fight this coronavirus? There he is, right there. This came out June 3rd. Okay, so we're on to the next topic, which is the coronavirus itself. That was Antifa and the... Did I skip this? I may have got this in the wrong order. Where do we got here? Yes, I think I skipped one here. I think I missed the Antifa one, did I? I did. Sorry, folks. This was the one I was supposed to do before the coronavirus. Let me take a look at this here. Yeah, so let's go up and do the Antifa stuff, because coronavirus and Antifa and BLM, they're all related. These are all groups. The BLM, these are all groups that are trying to push to destroy the Western way of life and to usher in a one world government. BLM, of course, is racist as hell. BLM Chicago organizer defends looting. That is reparations. I don't know if you guys saw this video. It's actually worth watching. This young woman makes this ridiculous claim that looting is part of reparations. Why is this not going forward? Hold on a second. Bear with me a second here. Okay, so let's move this forward. BLM organizer who called looting reparations dismisses peaceful protesting. In other words, peaceful protesting is not important. I guess you're allowed violence. This is on August 13th. And here we go here, reading from that article. The whole idea of criminality is based on racism anyways, she told NPR. In other words, these people don't think that there's such a thing as a crime, that it's just racism. I mean, I don't even know what to say. That is just so ignorant. It's just so ignorant. Criminality is punishing people for things that they have needed to do to survive, or just the way that society has affected them with white supremacist BS. What crap. These people just are pulling out these feminist, leftist talking points right out of where the sun doesn't shine. And then they're not supporting them, that nobody ever holds them to task on how they can support this crap. And this is what's one of the things that's the consequences is this growing racism and hatred of white people. It's coming from every quarter in the West now. Let's read this. At least 13 cops were injured and 100 people arrested in violent clashes that led to a mostly black community in the troubled South Side to kick out a BLM march the next day. Atkins attacked Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who was black, for calling the looting straight-up felony, a criminal conduct. It is. There's just no way around this, folks. You cannot have a peaceful, just, or safe, or even a reasonable society when you just allow people to loot and riot and beat each other up. That's nonsense. We have to have a thing called crimes. Crimes are unacceptable behavior. And if we're going to have unacceptable behavior like that, in the instance of violence and theft, we have to have a way to punish and to inhibit that, disincentivize that. Reading onward here. Atkins dismissed the idea that civil rights had ever gotten wins from peaceful protest. In other words, she's saying that they are going to violently protest. She dismissed the idea that civil rights had ever gotten wins from peaceful protest. Winning has come through revolt. Winning has come through riots. In other words, and this is coming from a BLM and Antifa person, they intend to escalate violence and theft and looting. This is a clear statement of intention there. The fact that anybody gives a crap about these businesses over what is happening in the city right now and the pain that people are in and the suffering that is taking place, I don't care, she admitted. But what about the pain of those people who lose their entire livelihoods? What about the pain of those people who are beaten unconscious? What about the pain of those people who are lost family members due to rioting, violent black people? I'm calling it black people because that is exactly what's going on. And it's not only black people, it's Antifa and BLM. But every time there is a black on white crime, the media ignores it. What about that pain? You think we should just lay down and take it? I'm not buying your white guilt. I'm not buying your white privilege. That's all crap. That's an excuse for your lazy ass. BLM. Geez, I think I just read all this. I must have doubled this up. So let's carry on. But anyways, that's a good picture you're seeing here. That's her shooting off her stupid mouth to a bunch of other stupid people who agree with her. There's no other way to call this. I mean, how can you call it anything but stupid and ignorant? It's not even civil. Ayanna Pressley, who is a representative in the U.S., Black Lives Matter is a mandate from the people, she says. It's time. Pay us what you owe us. This is a black representative, U.S. representative, saying, pay us what you owe us. Again, this is part of the extortion. The super wealthy know what they're doing here. They're destroying the middle class. They're pulling up the ladders to the top. They're pulling up the ladders even to a reasonable, successful and independent life. The wealthy throughout history have always wanted a slave working class, and they always work towards that. This is just the new invention of that same concept. Rep. Ayanna Pressley said on the House floor that the Black Lives Matter movement is a mandate, and the time has come for people to pay us what you owe us. Here she says, I rise today on behalf of every black family that has been robbed of a child, the Massachusetts Congresswoman and member of the Squad said. on behalf of every family member that has been forced to see their loved one lynched on a national television, except for that white family whose 5-year-old boy was shot in the head point blank by a black neighbor. You're not standing up for that family, are you? You're a disgrace. This woman is an absolute disgrace, not just to the US, not just to the House of Representatives, but to humanity. She's a disgrace for humanity, to humanity. Driving while black, jogging while black, sleeping while black. How about the increasing numbers of white people who are being killed and beat unconscious because they are white? That kind of racism doesn't bother you. If it doesn't bother you, then I'm not listening to you. And no one should be listening to you. In fact, that she got voted, that these women, these people who have these ideas get voted in at all, is evidence of exactly racism in your country, in the US, and it's spreading around the world. Let's read on. Centuries of institutionalized oppression will not be undone overnight, for racism in America is as structural as the marble pillars of this very institution. This is the bullshit crap that's been spread around by feminists for God knows how long. It is not. There are thousands upon thousands, if not millions, of examples of very successful black people with the same histories that you have. The difference is you're not pulling your own boots up. And there are all kinds of other races in the US who are doing exceptionally well. These people have no support for what they're saying here. Absolutely none. This is racism. This is greed. This is wanting to be paid for not doing anything. This is covering up your laziness, covering up your own failures. Presley's words come as Black Lives Matter has grown in prominence and has seen a spike in fundraising amid peaceful protests and riots that have spread across the country since George Floyd's death. Imagine writing that amid peaceful protests and riots. Amid peaceful protests and riots. I doubt there's been one single peaceful protest in the past 6 weeks. They're all violent. And the violence is increasing. And the violence has a target. It's called white. It's why they call white privilege, white guilt. It's why they call, white privilege, white guilt, and I forget the other one, and whiteness. They just call it whiteness now. The reason, and they try to argue that this is, they don't mean white people, they mean the culture of whiteness. But if it's culture you're after, they would have called it culture. But they don't call it culture because culture does not have a face. I can't overemphasize this enough. I can't emphasize it enough. Culture and cultural attitudes, laws, these things don't have faces. But white has a face. Whiteness has a face. You can stir up hatred to a face, but you can't stir up and direct a violent mob towards a culture, because a culture doesn't have a face. They use white privilege, white guilt, and whiteness because whiteness has a face and they want violence to destabilize the country. They know exactly what they're doing. These are very, very tricky people. President of Greater New York Black Lives Matter said this week that if the United States doesn't give the movement what it is asking for, we will burn down the system and replace it. This is one small group of the US telling everyone else in the US, and let's be clear here. This is very important to be clear. Black Lives Matter does not represent black people. We've seen an inordinately large number of examples of this. They only represent black thugs. Black Lives Matter represents thugs, not just black thugs, white thugs too. Black Lives Matter does not represent black people. They don't have that mandate, and many black people have disavowed the group. But here they're saying that they will burn down the system and replace it if they don't get what they want. Pay attention to this, folks. It's coming. And at least Trump has the backbone to state the truth here. Black Lives Matter states if the U.S. doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down this system and replace us. This is treason, sedition, insurrection. And I hope he backs that up with full police force. Because Black Lives Matter and Antifa are terrorizing honest, peaceful citizens right across the country and even around the world. It is a terrorist group. You don't even need to use the word domestic terrorists because they are not limited to the U.S. They may have formed first in the U.S., but they are a global group, at least with Antifa as one of their chapters. Now, here's an example here of what all of this these white guilt, white privilege, and whiteness, why they put a white face to the culture and the changes that they want to institute. Because they want this violence. They know full well that a lot of the Black community who are prone to violence, the thug element of their community, will take that as a permission to go out and kill white people. This 17-year-old Veronica Baker murdered by 4 Black teenagers, and the mainstream remains silent. Mainstream media, of course, considers and is equating racism with whiteness, and white supremacy, they're claiming, is at root of all the problems in the U.S. Police arrived at the scene of the murder to find Baker dead in the front seat of her car, her engine running, lights on, and door open. These are 3 of the 4 that committed the murder. The one that's not shown is because it's a minor. NBC and ABC, despite both having regional affiliates covering this story, have not issued a report on their national websites. Do you see the pattern developing? A similar chain of events followed the execution of 5-year-old Cannon Hinnant, whose story was only covered by CNN after the hashtag #SayHisName trended nationwide for a full day. Hinnant's murder also took place in North Carolina. And here, this is exactly the sentiment that they are trying to promote when they use things like whiteness, white privilege, white guilt. They want to fire these kinds of folks up to do exactly this: kill all whites. Kill all whites. This is the real racism rising in the U.S. and around the world. This is the true racism, folks. And Antifa rioters aren't sticking to the downtown anymore. I'm sure you've seen this. They're going into residential Portland, turning it into a war zone. And if you've seen the video of the terrorizing Antifa BLM group ordering people in a Portland suburb to give their houses over to Black people because they bought them off of Black people previously in the gentrification of the suburbs. They bought them. But BLM, in their thinking, they believe that the just thing to do is for people who then bought their own house, took the risk of the value of it going up or down, maybe repaired it and renovated it, just, okay, let's just give it back to you now that I've raised the value of it. They don't seem to even understand where this is going. No private property? What? Then the next group comes around, takes it from you and holds you at gunpoint and says, give me your house. This is the mentality of this group. That this has gotten this far so fast is inexcusable, and it's overdue time that citizens stand up and hold their politicians' feet to the fire and say, look, you put all resources together to stop this crap. because this is not included in a peaceful action of a society. This is not conscientious objection. This is violence. This is terrorism. And they're not doing anything about it. We expand this a little bit. Protect Americans says in a hate crime in New York City, a gang of black people beat up a white person and shout, "You white as hell," and they savagely beat him. When will we talk about black supremacy in this country? We don't seem any closer to dealing with that. And here you've heard about the Chicago one. Chicago had to raise the bridges into the downtown, shut down the mass transit after explosive night of riots and looting. This is just August 10th, 10 days ago. And all of that was because, well, we'll have a look at that. The looting went on a Magnificent Mile shopping district early Monday. That was about a week and a half ago. Sparked by a shooting by a police officer hours earlier that left a young man wounded. Yeah, a young man wounded. Let's just see why he was wounded. The rioting and looting began Sunday afternoon after police chased an allegedly armed man who, quote, turned and fired shots at officers. The deputy chief Delonde told Fox 32 in Chicago. Police then fired, injuring the man, she said. A crowd at the scene then clashed with police throwing objects at officers. Authorities said someone spread the false rumor that police had shot and wounded a child. And this is the same story. It's being repeated over and over in different cities around the U.S. The suspect shoots at officers. Okay, look, folks. When you pull out a gun and you shoot at an officer, all bets are off. Nobody should be surprised at this. In fact, you don't even have to shoot at an officer. You shoot at anyone in the U.S. where you're allowed to carry guns, and Chicago's not one of those areas. By the way, that guy is carrying an illegal gun. Of course, we all know that criminals don't care whether the gun is legal or illegal. But if you're in anywhere in the U.S. where you're allowed to carry guns and you shoot at somebody, well, you have a reasonable expectation that they'll shoot back to kill. To kill. And you shouldn't be surprised at that. But these BLMers are standing up and rioting to protect thugs who have already proven that they intend to do harm. I've got absolutely zero sympathy for Black Lives Matter. Zero. And it's sinking every day. And Antifa as well. And here, Portland. Again, Portland seems to be the epicenter of stupidity. Portland rioters viciously beat man, transported to a hospital with serious injuries. This is a guy who tried to protect the women earlier, and then, when they were all turned on him, he tried to drive away in his truck. They threw something at him, and he crashed his truck. They hauled him out of his truck and beat him unconscious. Incredible. And then there's a video of it. You can see the links in the description. Some guy gives him a big round kick to the head and knocked him right out. Had to take him off to the hospital. He did survive. There was some rumors online that he died, but no, he is coming around apparently, but who knows, he might have permanent injuries. And somebody tweeted at the time, a crowd is gathered around the unconscious victim's body. Some are pouring water on his head. Journalist Kaylin Dalmeida tweeted. Others can be heard arguing and establishing BLM responsibility for the attack. Here's the same headline here in the Daily Wire on August 17th. Here's the guy here who's unconscious at this point. He's unconscious here as well as people try to revive him. This is the guy that kicked him unconscious in the head from behind, folks. He was sitting on the ground, facing the other direction, and this idiot Antifa BLM scumbag comes up from behind and wickedly round kicks him in the side of the head, and out he goes. What a frickin' coward besides being a scumbag. Complete scumbag. And here is scumbag number one. This is the scumbag who kicked the guy unconscious. And I'm not saying that I'm letting any of these other BLM or Antifa guys off the hook. This guy's name is Marquise Love. Marquise Love. He actually has a last name of Love. This is so Orwellian. Everything that these people do has the opposite meaning of it. You, Marquise, are a hateful idiot, a scumbag. But knowing Portland as what we're seeing in Portland, he probably won't get one day in jail. Here he is again, scumbag number one of Portland. And here's another one. Say his name trends after media refused to report on the murder of 5-year-old Cannon Hinnant. This came out August 13th, 1 week ago. The media completely ignored this story, the mainstream media, until the hashtag trended. This guy shot little 5-year-old Cannon Hinnant while he was riding his bike, shot him in the head. Let's read this. As the Daily Wire reported on Tuesday, Sessoms, who is black, allegedly walked up to young Hinnant, who is white, and shot him in the head at point-blank range in front of his 7- and 8-year-old sisters. This is all coming from these feminist-inspired white privilege, white guilt, and whiteness ideas. They put a face to promote their hatred. The face that they want hated and attacked is white. That is why they invented those terms. There is Cannon Hinnant right there. Murdered for being white at 5 years old. Murdered for being white at 5 years old. Let's just make this, I think it's worth repeating. It's racism. It's violent racism. And the source of it is coming originally from the feminist ideas that white privilege, white guilt, whiteness, hate whitey. They want to, they are culpable in pushing this. And this little boy was killed for no other reason than he is white. That is racism, and the media ignored it. Completely and utterly ignored it. Here he is on his bike. He looks about the 5 years old right there. And there's the scumbag that shot him in the head for being white. The racist scumbag. This is a racist scumbag. It doesn't get much scummier than that. It doesn't get much more racist than that. That there is what a racist scumbag looks like. Okay, and this is, again, the same things. Let's read this quote from that article. Again, these are all in the links are all in the description. CNN, NBC, CBS, ABC, New York Times, NPR, The Washington Post, and MSNBC, as of Thursday morning, have yet to cover the attack. Fox News has covered the tragic news. Some have argued that the lack of coverage is because of the races of the victim and the alleged murderer. Duh. I mean, really, all of those organizations have been pushing that racism is a white on black thing only. They're avoiding this for that very reason. They're all behind Black Lives Matter and Antifa destroying the economy as well. This is what we're up against. This is the nature of our culture today. It is racism against white people, and it is from the top of our society. It is from the very top of our society. These very powerful media organizations are part of it, and they are owned and paid for by the super rich in the world, and they have an agenda, and this is part of their way to push forward their agenda. And this fellow tweets, it's so naked and blatant, if a death does not serve a political narrative, it is not important. And Matt Walsh says, the national media's blackout on Cannon Hinnant's story is breathtaking. It's possibly the most heinous murder in memory. A child executed at point-blank range while riding his bike in his dad's yard. And the national media has said nothing. Seriously, nothing. What more do we need to know about these national media? The fake news, they have no standing. We should be... it's just infuriating. Look at this tweet, this meme that's gone around. National attention for this cop dealing with this criminal who's high on 6 different drugs and he dies, versus this innocent 5-year-old boy riding his bike in his own yard, shot point blank, assassination style by this fellow, and it's just nothing. Nothing in the media. This one has been going on for months, and it's nonstop. This one doesn't get anything. Nothing. And look at this. This is a tweet out or a Facebook post by a supporter or a friend or Black Lives Matter guy of this fellow right here. And he's got right there, hashtag Black Lives Matter. What does Dante Salvador say? I don't know if you can read it there. I'm going to try and expand it up for you. I'll read it right out. Blew his little white privileged brains clean out of his head. Hashtag Black Lives Matter. He's truly happy about that. And this traces back to feminism. White privilege, white guilt, whiteness is the problem. Whiteness is the problem, and what, to no one's surprise, anyone with a quarter of a brain should not be surprised that when you push that whiteness is the source of all problems and you're giving permission to go out and attack white people, that white people get attacked. That is the direct result. And we have people like this supporting Black Lives Matter who, having seen a 5-year-old boy get his head blown off or his brains blown out, he says, blew his little white privileged brains clean out of his head. Hashtag Black Lives Matter. What more is there to say, folks? And yet they want the police disarmed and defunded. And unbelievable what's going on today. And look at what CNN finally did. This takes the cake, folks. Read the headline with me here, and this is referring to this very same murder of that 5-year-old white boy. A 25-year-old man has been charged in the shooting death of 5-year-old Cannon Hinnant. Okay? Look at the photo. The top leading front page photo on CNN, coming days afterwards, of course, when they're guilted into even talking about it, is a white man, the boy's father. But the headline says, a 25-year-old man has been arrested and charged in the shooting death of a 5-year-old boy. But they show not the picture of the man arrested. The whole first impression of the article is that a white guy shot the 5-year-old. It is exactly right, Soul Vibe. That is exactly what they want you to think. Because you know perfectly well that the overwhelming majority of people don't read past the headline. They may even just look at the picture and and get the gist of the headline. And that's where it ends with most people. So the majority of people coming across this CNN front page type or live TV show are going to think, oh, a white guy, those darn evil white people shot a 5-year-old boy. And that'll be the end of it for them. The evil white guy. That's the guy's father. And here in the first sentence, if you can read this at the bottom with me, police have charged a 25-year-old man with first-degree murder after they say he shot and killed a 5-year-old boy last week in Wilson, North Carolina. CNN. They have absolutely no shame. Absolutely no shame. They are the mouthpiece of the globalists. They're pushing that narrative shamelessly. And let's read on here. Hinnant told the affiliate he looked up and saw his neighbor Darius Sessoms. And this is Darius. This is down the article, okay? Down the article, they show the guy who's actually arrested. The headline implies, of course, the white guy did it. He saw his neighbor in the yard next door with a gun in hand, pacing frantic. I was looking at him as I was picking up cannon. I was so full of rage, but I could not leave my son's side. I just wanted to be with my son. Can you imagine this? I can't imagine it. I cannot imagine being in that situation. But then to see how the media treats it is just a frickin' insult. Now read up here. And here's, as we come up to the end of this session here, Antifa in Seattle flying the UN flag. If you don't think Antifa is in a fight for her, America is in a fight for her existence, you haven't been paying attention. That is absolutely right. Antifa is flying a UN flag. And why? Because, as the post-millennial points out, the United Nations comes out in support of Antifa. The United Nations, who depends upon the U.S. for an enormous amount of funding, comes out in support of Antifa, a terrorist group. It is a terrorist group. Let's read a little bit of that article. The UN Geneva Twitter account tweeted, UN hashtag human rights experts expressed profound concern over a recent statement by the U.S. Attorney General describing Antifa and other anti-fascist activists as domestic terrorists, saying it undermines the rights to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly in the country. Are they not been paying attention, have they? Peaceful assembly, mostly peaceful protests that just happen to land people unconscious and dead. Just mostly peaceful protests where they bomb a police station, where they destroy downtowns. What the heck? I mean, there aren't words. And yet, regular citizens aren't getting up in arms to end this. It's going to take that. It's going to take that because they're calling to defund police forces. It's going to take that, or it's going to take Trump calling in the military to stop all this terrorism, because it is terrorism, full and clear. And there should be no more money sent to the UN. The UN is not what it purports to be. It is a front for the pursuance of a one world government by very wealthy elites who want absolute power over the whole world. Let's read from the top. The UN refers to statements by U.S. Attorney General Bill Barr regarding Antifa. We have some investigations underway, very focused investigations on certain individuals that relate to Antifa, Barr said in an interview with Fox News. Sounds pretty reasonable to me. But in the initial phase of identifying people and arresting them, they were arrested for crimes that don't require us to identify a particular group or don't necessitate that. So they arrested criminals. Good. You'd think everybody should be proud of that. And Miles Chong says, why is the U.S. still funding the United Nations? The UN just endorsed anti-government insurrectionists, violent terrorists. You're absolutely right. Why are they indeed? Okay, so I'm going to end this with, if I can find the right ending point here, with the upcoming election. And this is a point on the election. A lot of this stuff, a lot of people say, why would the coronavirus be so important to the U.S. election? Well, and why would it be a global response to force being used in play in the U.S. election? Well, it's no secret, it shouldn't be any secret, that the U.S., what happens in the U.S. affects the whole world entirely. And what happens to the world affects the U.S. With the U.S. election coming up, the Trump administration stands in the way from pushing forward the agenda for one world government. There's no question about that. Trump wants to defund the UN. Trump is not pleased with the World Health Organization. Trump has identified the Antifa and BLM. I don't know about BLM, but Antifa at least as a terrorist group. Trump stands in the way of the agenda of globalists. Pushing a pandemic to affect the world affects the U.S. election as well. And they want so badly to win this next election, they can taste being emperors of the one world, the new world order. Now let's have a look at what this whole mail-in voting thing is all about, because it's kind of interesting too. Trump says universal mail-in voting would be catastrophic. And let's have a look at why. It comes after the U.S. Postal Service warned that millions of mail-in votes may not arrive in time to be counted in November's election. Okay, that's a valid concern. And what we're talking about here is that there's some in the Democratic Party that want to make the entire election, meaning everybody in the U.S. votes by mail. As it normally is, that you are allowed to vote for mail for different reasons in different states. Some states require you to have a reason to request a mail-in ballot. Some 50% or so of the states will give you a mail-in ballot on request, and 20% of the states give you every voter the option by sending out a mail-in ballot. But typically, the vast majority of voting happens at the polls, and a small amount of the voting happens through mail-in. So, what happens to the election if everybody is required, and this is the Democratic push, if everybody is required to send in a mail-in ballot and no polls, then the system is really easy to manipulate. But there's another implication to this. Only a handful of states we're reading on have so far said that they will be holding universal mail voting, meaning that voters will automatically receive a postal ballot ahead of the election, and a number of these did so before the pandemic. Okay, there's a handful of states that do that, but that's not what they want. They want everybody in the U.S. to do it by mail-in. He went on to say that the result of November's vote might not be known for months or for years, because these ballots are going to be lost, they're going to be gone. And they'll also, they'll be coming in for a very long time. And here from the New York Times, where Americans can vote by mail in 2020 election. These are 21%. They'll be mailed directly, the ballots, to that's 44 million voters. 57% of states or voters will be allowed a mail-in ballot if they request it. And 22% of the states, the voter needs a reason to request a mail-in ballot. That's the way it stands right at the moment. But this is rather interesting here, and I don't know if you can read this. I'm going to skip ahead here. Why would the Democratic Party was pushing mail-in ballots so much? Why would the Democratic Party be pushing for this, the requirement that everybody vote by mail? But not a Joe Biden presidency. What the heck? He stated that mail-in ballots was about winning the presidency, but not a Joe Biden presidency. The Democrats know that using mail-in ballots will totally screw up the system and put a major halt on determining who actually won the election. If the ballots are not counted and a winner determined by noon on January 20th, 2021, the sitting president and vice president will lose their seat. An interim president will be announced at that point. The presidency will go to the third in line for the presidency, which is the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. So, as predicted, if everyone is required to vote by mail, the post office said they couldn't handle it. The people who run these elections say they would delay it up to possible, or some people are suggesting that it could be delayed even years. So in other words, a mandatory mail-in ballot would mean that the election would not be done by January 20th, and the automatic, I think it's the amendment number 20, Constitutional Amendment 20 says that the president and vice president must be unseated, and the third in line, being Nancy Pelosi, automatically becomes president. In the interim, an interim president. So, impeachment didn't work. COVID-19 didn't work. So they're going to cook the books, so to speak, with the election. I think what they're doing is they're running all kinds of strategies. Just like they announced that they would impeach Trump before he was even sworn in. And then they had the Russian strategy, the Russian interference conspiracy theory. Now, this is just another one of their strategies. They're pulling every trick out of the book. These are deceptive, deceitful, malicious criminals. They have pushed and pushed the mail-in ballots this whole time, knowing that if they can get it passed, Pelosi will take over as president. Biden has known from the beginning that he would never see the White House. They used him as a pawn to distract the American people from what is actually about to take place. President Trump stated this morning on Fox and Friends that mail-in ballots will delay the outcome of the election for months, if not years, and the Democrats have known all along what they are doing. So, that's one theory. I think it's a pretty solid theory, actually. It seems very unlikely that mail-in ballots would result in a decision over the election win by January 20th. And that would mean that Pelosi becomes president interim. Here is the part of the constitutional amendment that describes that eventuality here. It's the printing is rather light, but the link is in the description. If on review, you can either pause the video here to read this, or you can look at the link in the description that describes what happens if a newly elected president isn't determined by January 20th of every election year. And it does mean that, in this case, Nancy Pelosi becomes president. And away you go. So, folks, that's all I have for you today. It was a long session, but there's so much more that's happened since the last coffee break. I'm not going to take such a long break anymore in these coffee breaks. This last session is that there's so much stuff, it just started to get overwhelming for me, and I just could not figure out what was important to talk about. But there's so much. So having said that, do something you love every single day, folks, and thanks for joining me here at Studio Brûlé. And I want to thank everyone for supporting us at Studio Brûlé. We really count on your support for making a go of it here. Do join me again. I think Janice Fiamengo and I will be talking tomorrow about what's going on at universities where people are not allowed to write against Black Lives Matter or Antifa. They will fail. They'll be kicked out of a class if they even argue anything against these movements that are going on today. So look for us tomorrow for another session of Coffee with Steve. Ciao, folks.